Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a historic first for a sitting U.S. president, Donald Trump crossed through the demilitarized zone and set foot in North Korea Sunday, walking side by side with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un after Kim greeted him at the demarcation line. Trump and Kim agreed to resume denuclearization talks, although Trump said sanctions on North Korea would remain for now. North Korea has said in previous negotiations sanctions relief is a necessary precondition to any sort of deal. The symbolic move came 24 hours after Trump wrote a message on Twitter offering to meet Kim at the DMZ after the G20 summit wrapped in Japan, and 4 months after nuclear talks between the two leaders broke down in February when President Trump walked out of the Vietnam summit. We'll have more on the story after headlines. In Hong Kong, thousands have taken to the streets today, the anniversary of Hong Kong's return to Chinese control 22 years ago. Dozens of protesters breached the legislature building, where they were met by riot police. Protesters continue to call for Chief Executive Carrie Lam to step down over a contested bill which will allow for extraditions of Hong Kong residents and visitors to mainland China, which critics see as an infringement on their legal rights and on the independence of Hong Kong. Lam has postponed the legislation but has not fully withdrawn it. The U.S. and China have reached a temporary trade truce after a meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping Saturday at the G20 summit in Japan. The truce delays a new round of 25% tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods. Trump also walked back a recently announced ban on selling U.S. equipment to Chinese telecom giant Huawei. He said China will in return import large amounts of American agricultural products. The Trump administration said, however, no timeline had been set to reach a longer-term trade deal with China. Also, while at the G20 summit, Trump met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, praising him as a reformer and telling him, quote, "You've done a really spectacular job." Trump refused to answer questions from reporters about bin Salman's role in the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi last October, but said the prince was very unhappy about the killing. The United Nations, U.S. intelligence officials, and U.S. lawmakers have all found credible evidence that the Crown Prince was directly implicated in ordering Khashoggi's murder. In Sudan, at least 10 people were killed after tens of thousands took to the streets Sunday, the first mass demonstration since the deadly crackdown on a peaceful protest camp in Khartoum by security forces in early June, which killed at least 128 people.
Since the 29th of Ramadan, I have felt my blood boiling in my veins, so I have to come out tonight. I had to march. I had to march for everyone killed. I had to march for the martyrs that died. March for the girls that were raped. I had to march to achieve something, anything.
Amidst an internet and press blackout, reports emerged of Sudanese police deploying tear gas, live ammunition, and stun grenades into crowds. Demonstrators are continuing to demand a civilian-led government after a months-long popular uprising led to the military overthrow of the long-standing authoritarian President Omar al-Bashir in April. In Afghanistan, a bomb explosion near a defense ministry building injured at least 65 people, including 9 children, in the capital, Kabul, today. According to local officials, the Taliban claimed responsibility for the bombing, which was followed by a gun battle with Afghan security forces. The attack comes after a weekend of violence across Afghanistan, and as U.S. and Taliban officials meet for another round of peace talks in Qatar to discuss the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Around 300 people, mostly fighters from both government and Taliban forces, were reported killed over multiple attacks Friday and Saturday. 8 election workers were among those killed in a Taliban attack on a government compound in Kandahar province Sunday. Afghanistan is currently gearing up for a presidential election at the end of September. In Italy, police arrested Carola Rackete, the 31-year-old German captain of a refugee rescue ship Saturday after her vessel collided with an Italian border police boat as she attempted to dock at the Lampedusa port. Raqueta and 53 refugees were caught in limbo at sea for over 2 weeks in need of medical care and food, as authorities refused to let the Sea-Watch 3 dock and passengers disembark. This is Raqueta speaking from aboard the ship the day before she was arrested.
The concerns about these people have really kept me busy day and night, I can assure you, especially also this very frustrating communications with governments which haven't taken responsibility. Then I have 22 crew total, so 21 apart from me, which are also my responsibility and who have been working very much, who are definitely fatigued, tired, frustrated, and also suffer psychologically from the situations where I have these over 60 people to take care of, and Mr. Salvini might just get in line.
Carola Raqueta was referring there to Italy's anti-immigrant Interior Minister Matteo Salvini, who refused to let Raqueta dock her ship and called her actions an act of war. German officials and human rights groups have praised the Sea-Watch 3's mission and condemned the Italian government for criminalizing humanitarian aid. The U.S. Senate Friday rejected a measure restricting Trump's ability to go to war with Iran without congressional authorization. The proposal would have retroactively attached an amendment to the $750 billion National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed Thursday 86-8. A similar bipartisan amendment to prevent unapproved military action against Iran was also introduced in the House last week. In an unexpected partnership, liberal billionaire donor George Soros and right-wing billionaire Charles Koch have teamed up to finance a new think tank with the mission of, quote, moving U.S. foreign policy away from endless war and toward vigorous diplomacy in the pursuit of international peace, unquote. The co-founders of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which launches in September, include Trita Parsi, founder of the National Iranian American Council, and Andrew Bacevich, retired colonel and Vietnam War veteran, both outspoken critics of U.S. military and foreign policy. On Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Alabama's attempt to ban dilation and extraction, the most common second trimester abortion procedure. If allowed to go into effect, the law would have affected 99% of abortions performed after 15 weeks. In May, Alabama signed the nation's most restrictive abortion ban into law, effectively banning the procedure except in cases where a pregnant person's life is at serious risk. That law is currently being challenged in lower courts. In another decision Friday, the Supreme Court agreed to hear an appeal by the Trump administration over its move to end DACA, that's deferred action for childhood arrivals. 4 federal appeals courts have since blocked the repeal of DACA, which affects the immigration status of nearly 800,000 formerly undocumented people who were brought to the U.S. as children. The court will hear the case in its upcoming term, which starts in October. A federal judge has barred President Trump from using $2.5 billion in Pentagon funds to build a border wall following his declaration of a national emergency in February. The move by California Judge Haywood Gilliam comes in response to 2 separate lawsuits and expands his ruling in May that said Trump does not have the authority to circumvent Congress to appropriate the funds required for construction. The ACLU brought one of the suits on behalf of the Sierra Club and the Southern Border Communities Coalition. Gloria Smith, an attorney at the Sierra Club, applauded the decision, saying, quote, walls divide neighborhoods, worsen dangerous flooding, destroy lands and wildlife, and waste resources that should instead be used on the infrastructure these communities truly need, she said. Former New York City police detective and outspoken advocate for 9/11 responders, Luis Alvarez, died on Saturday at the age of 53 after a 3-year battle with cancer. Earlier this month, Alvarez spoke before Congress alongside other 9/11 responders and former Daily Show host Jon Stewart, urging lawmakers to extend health care protections for rescue workers like himself who became sick after responding to the September 11, 2001 terror attacks in downtown Manhattan.
This fund is not a ticket to paradise. It is there to provide for our families when we can't. Nothing more. You all said you would never forget. Well, I'm here to make sure that you don't.
The House is expected to vote this month to permanently extend the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told a group of first responders last week the Senate would work to pass its authorization by August. In Virginia, James Fields, a self-described neo-Nazi who killed activist Heather Heyer at an anti-hate rally in 2017, was sentenced Friday to life in prison. Fields plowed his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville at a counter-protest of the white supremacist Unite the Right rally. Following the rally and Heyer's killing, President Trump claimed there were very fine people on both sides. Heather Heyer's mother, Susan Breaux, reacted to the verdict.
The last time I saw my daughter was to identify her body and to sign the papers for her to be cremated. And I held her bruised hand and bruised arm, and I said, I'm going to make this count for you. And that's what I've done, and I will continue to do. You don't get to knock my child down and silence that voice without 500 more raising up. Don't get to do that.
Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill Friday requiring formerly incarcerated people with felony convictions to repay all fines and fees to courts before they can vote again. Civil rights groups say the measure is essentially a poll tax. A lawsuit filed by formerly incarcerated people and groups including the ACLU and the NAACP immediately followed his move. Last November, 65% of Florida voters approved Amendment 4, restoring voting rights to 1.4 million people with nonviolent felonies who have fully completed their sentences by overturning a Jim Crow-era law aimed at suppressing the black vote. But Republican lawmakers have been working to stop the measure from being fully implemented. Following the signing of Friday's bill, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which led the campaign to pass Amendment 4, announced a new fund to help those with past convictions pay off their fines and fees and help them register to vote via the website wegotthevote.org. You can see our interviews with Desmond Meade, the head of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, at democracynow.org. 2020 Democratic candidates Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro headed to Clint, Texas, the immigration jail there, over the weekend, which has come under intense scrutiny over recent reports of inhumane conditions and child neglect. Julian Castro, the former San Antonio mayor and Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Obama, was denied entry into the Clint Child Jail on Saturday. Former Congressmember O'Rourke participated in a rally in front of the jail Sunday, calling out the dire conditions inside. Both Castro and O'Rourke also recently visited a Homestead, Florida immigration jail, along with other 2020 presidential contenders in town for the first Democratic debate, including Senators Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Bernie Sanders, as well as New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. In more news from last week's 2020 Democratic debate, Democrats are condemning Donald Trump Jr. after he retweeted an alt-right personality during Thursday night's debate who attacked Senator Kamala Harris's identity as a black American, writing, quote, "Kamala Harris is not an American black. She is half Indian and half Jamaican. I'm so sick of people robbing American blacks like myself of our history. It's disgusting. Harris's family were actually slave owners," he tweeted. Don Jr. reposted the tweet, adding, "Is this true? Wow." He then deleted the tweet later that night after coming under fire, including from Joe Biden, who clashed with Harris at the debate over his checkered track record on race. Biden tweeted, quote, "The same forces of hatred rooted in birtherism that questioned Barack Obama's American citizenship and even his racial identity are now being used against Senator Kamala Harris," unquote. Birtherism was widely promoted by Donald Trump while he was campaigning for president. 36 Jewish activists were arrested Sunday as they protested, along with hundreds of others, in front of an Immigration and Customs Enforcement immigrant jail in Elizabeth, New Jersey. The protest, organized by Never Again Action, brought together activists from the immigrant community and Jews who called for an immediate end to ICE raids, deportations, and immigrant prisons. And 4 million people took to the streets of New York City Sunday in the largest LGBTQ Pride celebration in history. The demonstration was just one of many taking place across the United States and the world this weekend. In some cities, however, events were banned and efforts to mark the occasion were harshly suppressed. In Istanbul, Turkey, clashes broke out between police and members of the LGBT community after the governor banned a planned annual march for the 5th running year. Back in New York City, there were 2 marches to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall uprising that sparked the modern-day LGBTQ movement. Hundreds of thousands marched down Fifth Avenue for the World Pride Parade, surrounded by millions cheering them on. And in Sheridan Square, at the very site where gay and trans people clashed with police on the early morning of June 28, 1969, tens of thousands more gathered for the anti-corporate, anti-police Queer Liberation March. This is longtime activist and journalist Ann Northrup, host of the free speech TV show Gay USA.
The Heritage of Pride main parade has evolved into a corporate party, and we just think that's ridiculous and insulting and demeaning and disempowering. So we got together to bring the community back into the streets.
We'll have more voices from the Queer Liberation March of tens of thousands later in the broadcast. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.